Hello, Quant. I have been putting off the very short, as you can see here, sampling lecture, but I do want to get to it, mostly because it's information you do need to know. Oh, we don't need presenter view though. I want you to be familiar with it, understand it, particularly for testing purposes. But most of it I think you already know or are familiar with. The notion of sampling is how you get the people who are going to be filling out your surveys. And we've talked about it, and we talked about it in 350. There are two major ways that we sample. Sample basically refers to selecting, again, people or units to include in a research study. We usually take samples from the population, and the population is the entire set that includes certain objects, observations, or people. And of course, it's usually very difficult to measure an entire population of everyone. The census even has its trouble, right? So again, we often take only a sample of the population. So we always have in mind some type of theoretical population. Who do you want to generalize these results to? So some of you in your studies, you want to generalize them to parents with children learning online. Some of you would like to be able to generalize to couples in COVID or quarantine, etc. And we'll take a look real quick at sampling frame. That's just everyone that you have available to you. We actually have a pretty big sampling frame. You usually want to keep your sampling frame pretty open. And we talked about that as well already with our surveys, because the more specific you get, the harder it is to fulfill that sample. So if you want people who have been married and have 3 children all 1 year apart, it's going to be a bit more difficult time finding that sampling frame. So this is really all sampling is talking about how you get people for your research. There are 2 ways. You can either have a probability sample or a non-probability. And literally this is the last slide of this lecture. So a probability sample, any of these probability samples, I'm going to go through each one. We say these are, you had a likely chance, it was by chance that you got selected. In some way they were random. Over here on this side, we have non-probability. Nothing happened by chance. There was no randomness to it at all. We had to get people doing whatever we could. So that's essentially the difference. So probability is this notion that everyone in the population had an equal chance of being selected. And of course, in our studies, there's just no way we can do a probability sample. It would be feasible if we were on campus and I said everyone needs to survey just SDSU students on campus at random. And random, okay, a lot of people in 350 thought it's random if I ask whoever's outside the grocery store because they're random people. No, that is not how it works, folks. Random means everyone had an equal chance of being included in the sample. If you just stood outside a grocery store and met people that came in, guess what? You're over here in a convenience sample, or even just grabbing volunteers. So this means everyone had a chance of getting into or being picked. So certainly I heard that a teacher was splitting due dates and doing it by the alphabet. And I thought, that's not even random. At least give everyone a chance of a random date to turn in their assignment. We say that is avoiding bias. So we like probability samples because they avoid bias. They give more equal opportunity. Everyone has the same chance of getting into the sample. However, again, very difficult to do. But I'll give you some examples of some research I have done and how I went about using random samples. Central limits theorem, also a leftover term from 350, that basically says the more the bigger your sample is, the more it will approach the normal curve. And that's why, I don't know how we're going to do here with our projects. I would really like to see people getting about 200 of these surveys, but we're really going to have to work our networks to get that. But if we can get closer to 200, then we're probably going to have a pretty representative sample that we can generalize to a population. And that's central limits theorem. And we'll take a look at the sample size chart that is in your textbook. Okay, so for probability, there's equal probability, me and my mouse, equal probability here. So a simple random sample. You put the entire population of SDSU into a hat, you draw names out, putting names back, and that's how you get your sample. It's completely random. Everybody has a chance. You put everyone in the population in. So I've done research on Christian schools who belong to the Christian Coalition of Colleges and Universities. If I am correct, there are about 27 schools in the U.S. that are CCCU members. So that's my population. So then I can put those 27 names of the schools in and say, I'm only going to investigate 5 and simply draw their names out. And every school then has an equal chance. That's a simple random sample. Okay? Stratified random samples just mean you put a little bit more criteria on the population. So your book does a great job too, so I want to point that out if you struggle. They've got some great graphs on this as well. So 375 is the stratified random sample. And all they're saying is, okay, I want these CCCU colleges, but I also only want women. So now I'm putting in what they call layers or criteria that I need, more than just the open, simple, random sample. So stratified random samples add some layers or criteria. So now I not only want CCCU schools, but I want only women in those schools who work in the sciences. So I have stratified that, but I could still do that. As a matter of fact, that's kind of what I did, and I'll explain it because I think you'll find that interesting. I really did more of a cluster sample. So let's talk about cluster. And again, they give a great little graphic in your book on 377 of cluster sample. And this looks at clusters of people. So I had to decide, once I picked these CCCU institutions, how was I going to choose who to send these surveys to? So I broke it down into the basic departments or kind of clusters. So the humanities, the sciences, the professional studies folks. So I broke it into clusters of departments that have things in common. Sciences, let's take, fine arts. That's how I did it. And then what I did is I said, well, what are then the departments within the sciences? Chemistry, biology, physics. And from there, I would send out my surveys to one department each time and keep rotating all the way through them. So that would be cluster. I actually did a cluster sample where I used different departments and clustered them all into basic units of academe. I also did a systematic sample because I did not want to, I didn't do a purely random sample. I did a systematic sample in that I decided I would take, this was research I did with other colleges, CIC, Independent Council of Colleges, and there were over 500 of them. So I was dealing with much bigger numbers, and I didn't want to do a simple random sample with 500. So instead, I made my life much easier. I still had a printout of all 500 colleges, and I used a random number generator that said take every, I'm pretty sure it was 7th school in this particular study. So all I would do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, boom, they're in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, boom, next one in. And that's systematic. It's still random because everyone has an opportunity to get in the pool, but it's much more systematic than completely putting them all in a hat and drawing each time. So that makes it a little easier on the researcher. So these are ways you can get very unbiased, random samples. Very often you don't see these in research simply because they're much harder to do. You have to find out who the population is, make sure you can then look at who can I take from that and how can I randomly select them. Okay, hopefully that's all we need to talk about. Over here, non-probability. There's no chance we picked you specifically. The biggest one you see in research is probably the convenience sample. And again, it's exactly what it says it is. It's convenient. We took whoever we could get. To make our sample random, we would have to basically the population, every single person who's online on some social media site. We would never, it's just impossible. This is a convenience sample. And it's basically, we base you on your availability. This is what is available to us. So this is who we're going to use. This is I met this person out in front of the grocery store. I'm going to use her. And please, I understand that the person you just met in front of the grocery store is random, but that does not make it a random sample. It actually the opposite makes it a convenience sample. So that's whoever we can get based on the availability. That is what we are doing. Volunteer samples, they may ask you to volunteer for a sample. They may even give you some type of reward. And those of you who have participated in SONA, that's essentially a volunteer sample because the sample is not open to the whole population and not everyone uses it, but they give you extra credit for taking the surveys in SONA. That's a volunteer sample. A purposive sample says you have to meet a specific criteria. And again, it's not like I did over here where I did clusters with the different academic units. Everyone in every academic unit in the college still had a chance to be included. But if I had narrowed it completely down to I only want women in the arts and I'm just going to see who will participate. That's purposive and convenient. Do you see where I'm going there? Or that's purposes is very specific. I tried to get you guys to stay away from purposive samples because they're harder. Where you have to say, I have to get someone who's currently in a romantic relationship. And there are still some of you I need to kind of check on with this because I'm worried on the COVID groups. We need to absolutely state at the beginning of the survey, have you been cohabitating with a significant other during quarantine? Yes or no? That could be a criteria of our sample. And the next one, quota samples. Quota samples you know a lot about. You break people into groups based on certain common features. And certainly a lot of the talk when we got into quota samples was around race. Because when they started putting quotas, if you will, on admissions, saying, well, we need this percentage of African Americans, this percentage of Latinos, this actually happened. And we had these quotas on admissions in colleges. And that's basically saying of the population of Latinos, we must have this percent. So how are we going to get that? And that's just it. It's not a random opportunity for everyone. They just want to fill that quota. So typically whoever comes first gets in so they can fill their quota. Once the quota's been filled, they're done. And again, that is not random. And the last one because we're using it is network. And of course now we can use network samples because we have Facebook, we have networks, and that's what we're doing, passing our survey through multiple networks online to get people to fill it out. So that's it for sampling, guys. It's a kind of an easy concept, but I hope probability, non-probability, everyone has a chance. Everyone has a chance of getting drawn from the population, an equal chance. Over here, no. We're doing things that are rewarding some but not others. Not everybody has an equal chance from the population of getting in. I had put this slide up about the sample size and the confidence interval. And I want to go back real quick. Yes, let's save that to our dashboard and show you in modules the sample size. So I'm actually going to go into the textbook again right here real quick. And start reading. Don't know how often y'all are accessing this, but it's pretty good for, like I've said in the past, definitions and such. So let's see. Did it put in? Nope, that's not the one I wanted. Sorry. 379. Go. So, boom. This is the chapter. It's very quick, goes through them, but look at the sample size chart. And I've showed this to you in 350 as well. Why am I interested in, this is the number and the sample you then can, the sample size you need. So I've asked you, I would love to see around 200 surveys or 200 people in our sample, and that will give us a pretty good curve. Now, where it gets interesting is when you have these very large population sizes. See, you only need a very tiny sample to make inferences. But one of the things we're going to start talking about in this next portion is that you definitely want to be confident. Your confidence interval says how confident do you want to be about your results. And that's where, if you want us to fall in a certain percentage of confidence, you've got to have a bigger sample. If we only picked up 10 surveys, we can't say anything. It's like we just surveyed 10 people. It becomes fairly meaningless. So we do want to be confident, which is why I've jumped you up over here with a collection of, we'll see, even if we only get to around 150, but look at how drastically it drops. We were 200 away here, and then we dropped to only 100 just by cutting 50 surveys down. Hopefully we'll get closer to 200. But a confidence interval is basically expressed, in terms of how confident do you want to be about your results. And that all has to do with sample size. Okay, that's really all I have to say about sampling. You know what we're doing, but I do want you to be familiar with the other types as well. And that is it for today.